Hello, everyone. Um, yes, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Candy Chen, Manager Dangerous Goods Standards at the International Air Transport Association. Welcome to our lithium battery webinar, the second last webinar of the two-week cargo webinar series. Thank you very much for joining us today, despite the very challenging times that we are all experiencing at the moment. In this webinar, your microphone is muted, but you can still submit your questions through the question box at the side and send to everyone. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available together with the PowerPoint slides at a later time after the event. And do take note that any discussions regarding to all commercial matters, such as fares, charges, and other relatively, competitively sensitive topics outside the scope of the agenda is strictly prohibited. And by the same token, questions pertaining to individual policies and discussions subject to bilateral decisions are also not going to be answered. So please take note about that. And this is today's agenda. So we will start with a brief welcome address, followed by the regulatory update, a panel session on the fire containment equipment standards, and finally another panel session related to the safety risk management. And now please join me to welcome Mr. Jeff Leach, Director DG Office UK for the welcome address. Jeff, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candy. As Candy said, good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. You're very welcome to this lithium battery webinar. I hope everybody is safe and well in these very strange times. It's a great shame we're unable to meet up this year because it offers such a unique opportunity for all sectors of the industry to come together to discuss the common issues related to lithium batteries. But congratulations to IATA, particularly to Dave Brennan and Candy Chan for not letting a mere pandemic get in the way of putting on a show. And thanks once again to them for inviting me to be their chairman. So I'm sure we're all grateful for the invention of the wonderful device that is the lithium battery. Where would we be without them, with our cell phones and our laptops and our tablets? So during lockdown, I got to thinking, why are they viewed so negatively by some? Why, for example, does it seem lithium batteries are treated differently to, say, aircraft parts? Let me give you an example. So if a counterfeit aircraft part was on a Boeing 737 and there was an accident, the enforcement action would rightly be against the supplier or the manufacturer of the part, not Boeing. And it will probably come as some surprise that bogus parts in aviation is a big deal. And they've even been found on Air Force One, would you believe? So why then, when we have an incident causing non-compliant lithium batteries, as all incidents invariably are, some call for increased regulation on the compliant industry? Doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense when you compare it to the aircraft parts. And why would the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, call for deletion of the provisions for the transport of prototype lithium batteries, which have been used extensively by the compliant industry without a problem, after an incident in which the shipper failed to comply with the conditions of approval? I'd also hoped that the hysteria around lithium batteries would have reduced, but sadly not. If I could just have the first slide, please, Candy. So back in 2014, the tragic disappearance of Malaysian MH370, with some suggesting that the disappearance was caused by lithium batteries because there were lithium batteries on board the aircraft. 2 and 2 together are making 5. Despite no evidence to support this, a lot of people believe that they must have been caused by batteries. But nothing seems to have changed, I'm afraid, because some of you may have noticed earlier this year when an Ethiopian Airlines Boeing 777 freighter in Shanghai caught fire during loading, the airplane was still burning when a headline appeared online that, although no idea what the cause of the fire was, it brought into question the safety of lithium batteries on aircraft. Just think about that for a minute. We have no idea what caused the fire, but it brings into question why the safety of lithium batteries. And it further queried IATA support for carriage of lithium batteries. So it's very strange how people, come to these opinions. So more than ever, we mustn't be complacent. We must do all we can. We must encourage others to ensure the stringent requirements designed to keep everyone safe are complied with. Let's champion the successes of lithium batteries and the freedoms they give us, rather than allow their reputation to be tarnished by the actions of the non-compliant. Whilst we only have an hour and a half instead of 2 days this year, we have some topics which I hope you'll find interesting. I'm sure you will. Later, Candy will moderate a session on fire containment bags and covers. And then I'll be joined from representatives from various sectors of industry to look at new requirements which ICAO have introduced, which are aimed at ensuring safety in the supply chain. But before all that, I'd like to invite Dave Brennan to give us an insight into the changes we can expect to see in the next edition of the Dangerous Goods Regulations. So I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Jeff, for that introduction, and again, my welcome to everybody for joining the webinar. So I'm going to talk about the changes to the regulations associated with lithium batteries that come into effect as of the 1st of January 2021. From next year, we get the changes that have been adopted by the UN Subcommittee of Experts on the Transport of Dangerous Goods that were brought into the 21st revised edition of the UN recommendations on the transport of dangerous goods, the model regulations, and also the changes adopted by the ICAO Dangerous Goods Panel that are in the 2021-2022 edition of the technical instructions. So the first thing we'll look at is in fact something that's not in the book for next year. I know many of you, particularly people in the pharmaceutical industry and probably broader industry, were aware of changes that were adopted by the UN to effectively accept data loggers and cargo tracking devices that are in use from the regulations. That was brought to the ICAO Dangerous Goods Panel. The panel spent a lot of time looking at the UN provisions that take these out of the regulations. There were some concerns that the UN provisions were a little broad, and the panel narrowed them down to only apply to lithium ion cells and batteries, lithium metal cells and batteries installed in data loggers and cargo tracking devices, and also said that it would only apply to those that fit into Section 2. So lithium metal cells up to 1 gram of metal, lithium metal batteries up to 2 grams, lithium ion cells up to 20 watt hours, and batteries up to 100 watt hours. And that was what was in the recommendations that the panel then forwarded to the ICAO Air Navigation Commission, as they're the body to which the panel reports. Unfortunately, the ANC wasn't supportive of the recommendations from the Dangerous Goods Panel. They expressed concern at the potential risk of data loggers and cargo tracking devices with lithium ion batteries that could be up to 100 watt hours, which is certainly a very large lithium ion battery in the context of a cargo tracking device or data logger. And they did not adopt those provisions into the 2021-22 edition of the technical instructions. There was supposed to be some work by ICAO in the interim to consider what limit should be placed on lithium ion cells and batteries to allow the provision to come in from 2021. However, for various reasons, that work has not happened. Given where we are in the year, I think it's unlikely that we will have anything in place by the 1st of January, although we'll certainly be looking with interest at how we can help ICAO and the panel move that forward, because we believe that there is significant value for industry in having these data loggers and cargo tracking devices not subject to the normal provisions that would apply to lithium batteries or lithium cells installed in equipment. Not directly related to lithium batteries, but the provisions around training on dangerous goods are changing from next year. We've been talking about it for many years. Those of you who have been following it will understand we've been looking at bringing in competency-based training for dangerous goods. This isn't a revolution as many people, I think or fear. It's more an evolution, looking at training for dangerous goods being more focused on the job function that's performed by the employee. We've been used to looking at tables 15A and 15B if it's airlines that don't hold an approval to carry dangerous goods as cargo. And I think people were misusing those tables because they were looking at that as being a mandatory list of elements that must be in a training course. And that, of course, is not true. Those tables have been taken out. They also have a list of employers and categories of personnel. And now it will be much focused on the training related to the function being performed, as I said. It would be very clearly stated that it is the employer that is accountable for assessing the competence of their employees. And to ease this in, there will be a 2-year transitional period until the end of December 2022, during which the training provisions that are in the current edition of the Dangerous Goods Regulations may continue to be used. And to promote and assist with that, the subsection 1.5 from the current edition has been moved to attachment A in Appendix H in the 2021 edition. And some of this will depend, of course, on how the regulatory authorities implement competency-based training within their jurisdictions. So that's something that you perhaps, if you've got particular questions in that area, need to reach out to your civil aviation authority. The next thing in the regulations, we have some changes around special provisions. We have special provision A88, which allows for the transport of prototype or low production run lithium cells and batteries to be shipped under the approval of the authority of the state of origin. And we have A99, which applies to lithium metal batteries with a net weight in excess of 35 kilograms, and that too needs approval from the state of the state of origin. However, it doesn't currently require the state of the operator, and given that these are being moved on aircraft under the jurisdiction of that state, it's believed that they should be part of the approval process. After all, that's what happens with special provision A1 and A2. If you have dangerous goods that are normally forbidden or forbidden on a passenger aircraft, it requires approval from the authorities of both the state of the origin and the state of the operator. The other thing we've done in both of those special provisions is it refers to a packing instruction that only exists in the supplement to the technical instruction. And that's packing instruction 910 for A88 and 974 for A99. And there's been quite a bit of confusion where we've had shippers offer, say, prototype lithium batteries. They have an approval from the state of origin under A88, and yet the shipper has put 965 as the packing instruction, in which it is not 965. It is no longer appropriate because packing instruction 910 in the supplement requires that the packagings must meet packing group 1 performance standard, for example. So we're saying that you must have the correct packing instruction number, and that will also, we hope, drive the regulators to provide a copy of the packing instruction that applies with the approval so that the operators or their ground handling agents can do an effective acceptance check looking at the correct information. There's been quite a bit of change to special provision A154, which applies to damaged, defective lithium batteries that have the potential to create a fire. These are ones that, if it's a lithium battery that simply won't hold a charge, they're not defective for safety reasons. These are the ones that have the potential to cause a problem. The UN did quite a lot of work in revising the text to be a bit more indicative over what constitutes damaged, what constitutes defective. So the panel brought that text in, but maintained the provision that these are forbidden for air transport. Special provision A201 currently allows for the transport of lithium ion cells or batteries, lithium metal cells or batteries as cargo on a passenger aircraft, requires approval from the states of origin, destination, and of the operator. A member of the panel brought an issue to the panel saying that this was completely impractical, and that's why effectively none of these approvals had ever been granted, because of the time that you need to get 3 different states issue an approval. And yet there is a need for batteries for urgent medical needs. These may be for things like defibrillators or even implantable pacemakers. And these do need to be moved on a passenger aircraft. So what was agreed is that there could be an approval that would just be the approval from the authority of the state of origin and an approval from the operator. Now, it's not the state of the operator, it's the actual airline that is going to be asked to carry those lithium batteries. There is a maximum of 4 lithium batteries that will be allowed to be carried, and we believe that this will offer flexibility, particularly for remote areas where they may have a need to get these batteries urgently, and air is really the only way that they can get there. Looking at the packing instructions, I mentioned A54, so we currently have text in the packing instructions that refers to damaged or defective. It's a reasonable amount of text at the moment. That'll be removed and simply replaced with a reference to special provision A154. In section 2, we currently have a requirement that the shipper must provide a compliance statement on an airway bill when it's used to say, lithium ion batteries in compliance with section 2 of packing instruction 966, for example. An industry had raised the questions, well, we have multiple consignments on the same airway bill. We may have lithium ion under 966, we may have lithium metal under 969, and maybe even lithium metal under 970. And was there a way to combine all of that compliance statement into a single statement rather than 3 separate statements? And particularly 3 separate statements, you're taking up real estate on the airway bill, and for the e-airway bill, it's obviously taking up information that's, if it's the non-XML one where you've got limited characters, then that was a problem. So that was agreed to have a single compliance statement. So something like lithium ion and lithium metal batteries in compliance with section 2 of PI 966/967. And we've included some examples into 8.2 where we have airway bill examples in the DGR to show how that can be done. We've also made changes in packing instructions 967 and 970. Airlines had received shipments. In fact, we had a very close call with a fire of used laptops that were being shipped for refurbishing. And the issue was that the batteries or the laptops were all just packed one next to the other in effectively a fiberboard box used for the sort of things that you'd have files in, with no protection. And of course, they're used laptops, they're going to be shipped to be refurbishing, so there wasn't a concern about that they may get chipped or scratched or something. However, when we looked at the packing instruction, we recognized that there was nothing that actually said that if you have multiple pieces of equipment in a package, that they have to be protected against damage from contact with other equipment in the same package. The assumption was we're talking about brand new things, and of course they'll be very well packaged. So we've added that, and we'll be taking that issue up with the ICAO Dangerous Goods panel, because as the industry sort of moves to the circular economy and having things refurbished and not just thrown into waste, I think we'll be seeing more and more of these, and we'll be looking at how we can ensure that this is handled properly and doesn't pose a safety hazard. Just waiting for the next slide to come up. There we are. We also have a small change to the lithium battery mark. This was something that came to the UN subcommittee. The battery industry said that the current mark at 120 by 110 was too large. It was taking up too much real estate, and they actually looked for a lithium battery mark that was only 50 by 50. Now, the subcommittee did not agree to having a lithium battery mark that was only that small. They believe that that was taking away the benefit of having the hazard identification on packages. What they did, however, agree to was allow a 100 by 100 mark, and for the reduced size to be 100 by 70. And of course, that's within the current size of the existing mark. The language will also say the lithium battery mark to be a rectangle or a square. So if people have the existing 120 by 110 mark printed on packagings, they can keep using it forever. It's in excess of the new size, and there's no reason that you have to change. But if people do want to change, then they can take their time as their existing stocks run out, and that can be moved to pick up the new mark when they've got run out of their stock or run out of their pre-printed packagings. And just to give you an idea, that's what it looked like. Nothing very different to what we've got today. It's simply a square instead of a rectangle. That's the extent of it. In section 9, we have some changes. This is for the operators, and I would probably suggest they'll be looking at their ground handling agents as well. They have existing text in paragraph 9.1.9 that says that operators should include a safety risk assessment for the transport of dangerous goods, including lithium batteries, as part of their overall safety management system. We have new provisions coming into Annex 6, Operation of Aircraft, Part 1, International Commercial Air Transport Aeroplanes, with a Chapter 15, Cargo Compartment Safety, that will mandate that operators do a specific safety risk assessment. And for that reason, the text in the DGR in 919 has been changed from a should to a must, and to also reference this new part. So that's the extent of the changes in the DGR and the ICAO technical instructions for next year. I now want to touch briefly on the work of the SAE G27 committee on the development of performance-based packaging standards for lithium batteries as cargo. So this work started at the end of 2015 when ICAO approached SAE to develop a packaging performance standards for UN 3090, UN 3480, so lithium metal, lithium ion cells and batteries. And this was based on the decision by the Council to prohibit the transport of lithium ion cells and batteries as cargo on passenger aircraft until controls are in place to establish an acceptable level of safety. And the objective of this packaging standard is that if a cell is forced into thermal runaway, then there will be no hazardous effects outside of the package. Now, this work has been going on. I think we're up to the 7th draft of the standard. We have a baseline test for packages containing lithium metal, lithium ion cells or batteries. This will be very specific. It'll only be valid for the type and quantity of cells and batteries as tested in the package. There's tests to determine benign cells or batteries, and these are cells that have been determined through testing to pose no significant hazard. And then there's some work around generic packages. I think this one's going to be a real challenge because the industry is saying, oh, but we don't want a specific package, you know, for 6 batteries or 10 batteries or 15 batteries. I want to have a package that I can basically put anything in. And I say anything in very, very large inverted commas, but this will be analogous to the UN V-rated packagings. And then the other work is the oversized cells and batteries, and these are ones that are too large to fit into the test chamber. So where are we at the moment? So this work is ongoing. There'll now be some round robin testing by 6 different laboratories on identical cylindrical 18650 lithium ion cells. And the purpose is to identify that, in fact, the laboratories come up with identical or very comparable results. And of course, if they don't, then it means that there's more work required to develop more specificity on the setup of the test standard and the performance of the test. There's still ongoing discussion on consideration for an external fire test or other protection against an external fire. And in fact, we'll hear a bit more about that in our next session. And there's a possible ballot from the voting members at the end of 2021 that may see the standard adopted, although I wouldn't hold my breath. So the next step is that the committee has to agree the content of the AS6413 standard. It then goes through the internal SAE aerospace approval and then release. It then would have to go into ICAO, the Dangerous Goods Panel, the Flight Operations Panel, and the Airworthiness Panel on how or even if the standard should be incorporated into the technical instructions and or other ICAO manuals or documents. And time frame, I think best guess January 2025, although don't hold me to that, it may slip by a couple of years. So that's it from me. I'll now hand over to Candy, who can talk about the work on.
Thank you very much, Dave. Yes, so it's the time for the fire containment equipment. We have been talking about these equipment for so many years now. If I can still remember it correctly, I think we first started talking about it maybe approximately 8 to 10 years ago, and now it's getting more and more popular. And these actually come with different types of containment equipment. So some of them are actually certified aircraft unit load devices. They can be fire-resistant containers. And some of them, they are actually developed to be deployed in conjunction with other aircraft certified unit load devices, such as fire containment covers or fire containment bags. But the thing is, why should we really be considering that? So nowadays, it's actually not just airlines that are thinking about getting them. It's also the shippers or sometimes even freight forwarders trying to acquire them and hoping that one day, if they actually get these, then they can get the shipments smoother again, especially for lithium battery shipments. So let's have a look at why we should be considering them. First thing is ICAO Annex 6, Chapter 15. So Dave was talking about this chapter earlier. It's actually an ICAO mandate. It's referring to the cargo compartment safety. Basically, everything that you can find in this chapter is related to safety risk assessment. But one of the very important things that you have to include in this safety risk assessment is the containment characteristics of unit load devices. So now if you think about it, for the traditional unit load devices, such as AKEs or PMCs, there's no containment characteristics that you can talk about, right? So people start to think about some other things that would have these containment characteristics. And another thing is the rise of e-commerce. And then leading to many people start to think about, okay, what are being transported today? What's actually in the box, in the bags? So then all these things that they were initially triggered by lithium batteries because of all these kinds of batteries that are being transported and all these kinds of potentially, possibly undeclared batteries that people transport, then people start to think about getting additional risk mitigation measures. So these are some examples. So these are the fire-resistant containers. You can see that they have got lower decks, or upper decks, mid decks that you can consider. And these are some examples of the fire containment covers and the fire containment bed. But what are the standards now? Basically, the standard today surrounding these articles, they are just for Class A fire. Class A fire is a completely different animal compared to any of the lithium battery fire. Plus, they are only for Class B, E, and F cargo compartments. And what about Class C? So in this panel session, we will invite our experts to join us today to review some of the work that they have done concerning about lithium battery fire and some of the standards that they are working on, in addition to the current existing standard for the Class A fire. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Terindo Sananayaka, Business Unit Manager Cargo from MSafe Bridgeport. Terindo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Candy. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone from US side. I'm Terindo Sananayaka, the Business Unit Manager for Cargo. As Candy rightly mentioned, we have been discussing and developing this product for last 15 years in the market. And then she talked about these lithium-ion battery standards as well. So in this short presentation, I'll be taking you guys through the one of the testings that MSafe Bridgeport has carried out in one of our products, and then I will get into the panel discussion. Candy, will you be able to get me into the next slide? So this testing we did in a UK-US typical skid size fire containment cover. And our objective of this testing was to understand what would be the worst case scenario in a lithium-ion battery fire situation. So we did our testing with 4,800 batteries, which was packed into 12 boxes with 400 batteries equally distributed in each box. And another action we took was removing all the standard packaging of these batteries and getting these batteries bundled together. The main idea was we want to get all the batteries into thermal runaway, and some of these current packaging, such as cardboard separators, helps to avoid this thermal runaway. And then we use 12 heat cartridges, that is one heat cartridge each, which is 1000 watts, in each of these battery boxes to ensure that all these batteries runway at the same point, so the intensity of the fire is to the maximum level. And then the surrounding was with Class A material with 18 boxes, and you can see in this picture the numbered boxes are the boxes which was with lithium-ion batteries. And then we to monitor the temperatures and the behavior of this fire, we used 16 thermocouples, which 8 thermocouples inside on the lithium-ion battery boxes, and another 8 4 inches away to understand what is the behavior in the surrounding of this fire. Also, we had another piece. What I am pointing at is a small fire containment bag with 1000 batteries inside. Which is not with any heat cartridge or anything, purely to understand what will be the impact when it's next to adjacent to a huge battery fire. Candy, the next slide, please. So the result of this testing was we managed to contain the fire, and we did the testing for 6 hours, and our objective of getting all the batteries, the 4,800 batteries into thermal runaway, were successful, and we did not see any flame penetration or external flames. Also, the smoke, which is very important, was visible in 3 minutes, so that is very much adequate for the pilots to understand there is a fire inside. And one of the key aspects that we saw with regard to the peak temperatures, that one of these boxes reached 1633 Celsius. This is the highest that we have seen in any of our testings. And 4 inches away, we have experienced only 119 Celsius. That is surrounding of the cover, that is the peak temperature. And the bottom of the cover, that is touching the aluminium pallet, this was at 163 Celsius. This is a very summary of this testing. Candy, if you can click it, there are a few photographs for the audience. So this is how the cover looks like after the testing. And you can click further, Candy. Yeah. And this is how the batteries looks like. We looked at each and every battery to understand whether all 4,800 went into thermal runaway or vented, which has taken place. This is very limited time I have here, so I will stop on this one. But if you guys need any more details, please get in touch with Candy so I can provide more details and we can further discuss during the panel. Thank you. Candy.
Thank you, Terindo. Very useful details that you revealed with our audience today. And I'm sure that we are going to talk about it more after we have got another panelist to present what else they have done so far. So please join me to welcome Mr. Enzo Calali, cabin safety expert of EASA.
Hello, can you see my screen? Sorry, I see my camera is. So, okay, I will start, although I don't see my face on the screen. There must be some technical issue here. I will deliver in this presentation basically the information related to the research projects that EASA has developed in the last years with the support of the European Commission to overcome the issue coming from the restrictions to the transportation of batteries, basically in the framework we are in. We have no possibility to ship batteries on passenger airplanes, and the objective of this project was to really give the possibility to find solutions and identify mitigation means that could allow reaching a level of safety supporting less severe restrictions be imposed to the current mode of operation. So the project is called Sabadair. It was launched in 2017. It involved testing activities in 2018, 2019. We are ready to publish the final report. It should come out any week. Next slide, please. Consortium involved companies which cover all kind of expertise from Airbus to Vito, company very knowledgeable in the subject battery design. We had also labs involved, so DLR in Germany for full-scale test, and we had a lab in Scotland, impact solutions for the G27 type kind of test. We also had DG Safety developing the final guidelines that were the outcome of this whole research project and the outcome of the more experimental related tasks. So one of the thing that we tried to do with this research project was to follow up on the work done by the SAG27 committee, which I am directly involved, and try to give recommendations on how to develop the new standard that would be applicable to package used to transport batteries in cargo compartments of large airplanes. At the same time, we have tried to have a look at how we can address the risk coming from an external fire that is not starting from batteries, but may involve batteries which are in the same cargo compartment. And the overall outcome, final outcome, should be production of safety of guidelines for safety risk assessment to be used by the operators in assessing whether they can or cannot transport batteries under certain conditions. So you can see in the pictures on the right the test chamber we have used for the cargo compartment mock-up tests. It's an MPS, Allen replacement MPS test chamber, which is basically used to evaluate performance of replacement agents against Allen 1301. So the environment you're talking about is typical Class C cargo compartments. And why are we talking about this? Because in the protocol we developed, next slide please, Candy. we tried to evaluate what kind of benefit could come from introducing fire containment covers in the setup of the test. So the idea was to study the external fire scenario. So in this case, the fire containment cover is not supposed to contain with its volume the effects of a battery fire originating inside the cover, but it's rather used to ensure that no external fire could create conditions that are such that the batteries which are within the cover can be involved and contribute to increase the severity to an unacceptable level. So the way we designed this protocol was to run some sort of baseline testing with discharge of halon in the chamber. The system, the fire suppression system, was set to replicate the performance of state-of-the-art twin-aisle aircraft. So classic cargo compartments basically observe the same conditions after flight. The flight crew determines that it's the time to release the agent in the chamber. We used a fire load which was consisting of cardboard with shredded papers, in which we inserted always in the same locations boxes containing 100 cells. We are talking about 18650 cells and NMC chemistry for a total of 800 cells. So there were a total of 8 boxes of 100 cells within the pallet that was used for the test. And what we have tested with halon without the fire containment covers. Then we have added the fire containment cover to protect the battery boxes. And then we had a plan to repeat the test, including thermal insulation. The issue is trying to see if we can mitigate also thermal effects which are not, let's say, directly happening immediately in the fire event. So the fire containment cover is providing a good shield, good protection from the fire flames that develop initially, but after halon discharge we still have some temperature increase, and the temperature may remain to levels which may be compatible with thermal runaway starting from the lithium batteries. Next slide, please. What we have here is a sketch showing more or less how the boxware places. And interesting thing is that we tested that state of charge which exceeds what is currently allowed. So we ignored the 30% state of charge limit. We tried to see how we could create a very severe event. And in this test, we ended up using batteries at 100% state of charge or 50% state of charge, depending on the setup. But what you can see on the right is the comparison of the temperature measured inside the boxes in the test with halon, without fire containment covers, and below you see what we measured when we used the fire containment covers. Exactly the same setup. You can see that the temperatures drop down significantly, and this is giving us some indication that the presence of fire containment cover may be fully adequate to cope with certain kind of external fire events. Of course, we tested only one test scenario with one type of batteries. What we plan to do, in next slide please, is to carry on with a new research project. Actually, it's a very interesting research project. We have published the goal for tender. The deadline is 10th of November, so it's coming soon. We plan to test in 2021, and what we want to do, we want to study the performance of fire suppression systems, halon-based and halon-free, in handling battery fires. So now, when we say battery fires, we have two types of scenarios that we are talking about. One is the scenario that we want to implement in the MPS for cargo compartment tunnel replacement, which will involve testing low density distribution of batteries in the cargo compartment and showing that the new agent and new fire suppression systems can handle that kind of battery fire. This test will be run with batteries at 50 to 100% state of charge. One other objective of the test is to repeat the same kind of sequence of tests that we did for Subair on on different cell types and slightly different test conditions. But the idea is to confirm that fire containment covers can be used to protect the batteries from external fires. As I said, the results should be available during next year, and we plan to present it in the international meetings that will come as soon as they are available. All this work is linked to what we are doing in general for fire containment covers, fire resistant containers. Next slide, in which we have to recognize one limitation that is, of course, creating the problems related to use of these devices. First of all, we want to offer flexibility to the operators. So these devices are not part of the aircraft design, so that can be used in the most flexible manner. The tool we use to establish performance standard for these devices is mainly the EASA, so technical standard orders. We have one for covers, one for containers. We are in the process of updating them, and we plan to update them. This is already fixed to improve the way we establish performance in terms of containment of Class A fires, so basically ordinary combustible materials, wood, cloth, paper, plastics. But we keep on receiving requests to have improvements in the MPS to cover other classes of fires. And we certainly consider that, but we have to face the big challenge of defining a standard fire load for these tests. While we do it for Class A fires, and we have this sort of fire scenarios that we develop for cargo compartment testing, for batteries, we struggle to reach an agreement in the community, in the aviation community, on what is a reasonable fire load. The same problem is affecting the G27. So the new standard we are developing for the package, as Dave mentioned before, is going to be tailored to a specific combination of package and battery design. So it will be really specific. You pass that test, you can ship batteries using the configuration that you have tested. So it's not as flexible as the use of fire containment covers is, fire resistant containers is supposed to be in our intentions. Another big issue is, of course, the work we are doing to try to see if we can simplify the way the impact of the use of these devices have on fire protection systems performance. So smoke detection and effectiveness of halon or any other agent used to achieve fire suppression. In this case, the intention would be to create a standard protocol that ensures that the minimum level of performance is achieved, that is somehow not compromising extensively smoke detection, which means creating openings to let smoke come out timely. At the same time, fire suppression effectiveness is demonstrated by letting agent in. So as you see, this objective is going in the direction opposite to fire containment of batteries, and that's why we struggle to find a way to improve the minimum performance standard without running the risk of complicating things which are already quite complicated. And the challenge is to really see if we can work together with the industry and identify the good balance between the improvement in performance standard and flexibility of use for the operators. And then that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enzo. It seems that even the EASA is doing a lot of testing with lithium batteries with these equipment that everybody is looking at the moment. It is actually a very good news for all of us, in fact, because this is what the industry wants, at least a standard from the regulatory bodies. And now, please, I would like to invite Mr. Trevor Howard to also join us with this panel session. Trevor, Manager Quality and Standards, Emirates, and together with Torindo from MSAFE Report, Enzo, EASA, please join me together for the panel session. All right, thank you very much for joining us today, Trevor, Torindo, and so. So concerning on the fire containment equipment, actually, Trevor, can you share with us on what kind of tests that you have done so far? Because we are aware that your company is already using some fire containment covers and maybe some FRCs as well. And we also know that some other airlines, they might have already done some lithium battery fire tests too. So for you as an operator, did you just decide what else would be suitable for your operations based on others' tests, or you also had to do your own tests too? Trevor, over to you.
Thank you, Candy. We didn't do any testing specifically ourselves. What we did is work with our suppliers and our partners in the testing that they were working on, which can be conducted in the conditions as was mentioned by Torindo and Enzo previously. So there are obviously many different types of tests, whether you're using a fire containment cover, fire containment bag, or fire resisting container. So we would look for the testing that was done, and also with some other operators that have done testing with different suppliers as well in the past, and they've been able to share that information with us, and we've been able to participate and to participate in the Saboteur, as Enzo had mentioned, seeing the results from the last meeting that they held, and as well as the some testing with that AMSAFE has conducted as well with both the fire containment covers and the bags.
Thank you, Trevor. Torindo, so your name appeared a few times by Trevor, it was mentioned. And you also told us that you did some tests with the lithium battery fire that you considered. But how did you really determine the pass-fail criteria by yourself? Because as you know, the standard right now is nothing related to lithium battery. Then how did you determine what is successful or what is a pass or a fail?
Excellent question, Candy. I mean, first of all, when we carry out testing, our objective is not to categorize it as a pass or fail criteria. The reason being, there are so many different objectives why we are carrying out this testing. Purely to our objective or the industry objective is to increase the safety standards. So our objective of every test that we have carried out or any other supplier testing is to learn and increase the safety of the industry, or provide something to increase the safety of the industry. So when getting into the criteria, that some tests that we have purposely done to I have to use the word fail, unfortunately, to purposely to fail the testing as well. This is purely to understand what needs to be done to the product to avoid that type of situation. I can give you one example. When we did one of the testings with 800 or 1000 lithium-ion batteries, I can't remember the exact number, we placed them in the right of the edge of the pallet and then cover it from a fire containment cover, just to understand how the batteries are going to behave. And then we saw that batteries are slipping through the bottom of the pallet. So there are various things that we looked at in those criteria. Then another important factor that we looked at is the consistency, say, of the our testing. So far, we as a company has carried out more than 10 lithium-ion battery tests, and then about 12 to 15 Class A fire tests. And then we looked at all the data to see the consistency of that test. And then we provide whether this is a can be successfully contained. And then the airline, like people like Trevor, who are the experts of the airline, will extrapolate all the data to see, okay, whether this is a product that can improve my safety or not. So that is our pass-fail criteria, actually.
I see. Thank you very much for sharing, Torindo. So actually, many people have done many tests. Some airlines, they contact the OEMs for testing. And some OEMs, maybe they were trying to see how well their products can perform, and they will also do some tests. But of course, what's important is what the regulator said. So Enzo was talking about that there will be some test standard. but it is also recognized that it is very difficult to have a lithium battery fire test standard. And during his presentation, he also mentioned something about the G27 standard. So, Enzo, well, I understand that a lithium battery fire can be influenced by many different chemicals or variables. So it can be different on in terms of the fiercity, like different chemicals or different volume of air. But how likely that in the new test standard that you mentioned, that we could include maybe a baseline lithium battery fire test standard? And when do you think we can anticipate to have the standard ready, the one that you mentioned as one of the future projects that you have, Enzo?
Very interesting question. So the first thing I would like to say is that if you develop a new test method, you have in mind some scenarios, and based on the fire scenarios you have in mind, you develop the test setup and the pass-fail criteria. If you look at the G27, the way it is been designed, the method is addressing containment of a thermal runaway event within a certain package or a specific design. And the way the containment is evaluated, the performance in terms of containment is evaluated, is looking at presence of flames, temperature measured outside the box, so if you want thermal effects, and explosions. Now, these are the three elements that we always take into account when we design new test methods which are related to the assessment of battery fire scenarios. And I think it's very difficult and very challenging to find a design feature that is, or a piece of equipment that is capable of addressing all three elements at the same time in a lab scale test. So for example, if we look at the G27, it's very likely you can meet the standard, but you will not be able to demonstrate that certain packaging is also capable of protecting the batteries from impingement from an external fire. So this will complicate things and will result in very costly solutions that at the end will have to be used by the operator. Probably they will not be used by the operator because they are not cost effective. At the same time, when you look at fire containment covers, they have a lot of very interesting features and properties, and they have a very good level of performance in certain scenarios. But for example, in the way we have so far tested fire containment covers, we cannot capture the assessment of the risk of explosions. Because we simply do not collect the gases which are released outside the cover. And if you look at the G27 standard, this is actually what is haunting us. It all started from some tests that the FIDEC Center did, showing that if you release gases from cells, a very low number of cells in a confined volume, and you have an ignition of whatever kind, it could be an electrical system, there could be an explosion that could compromise the fire protection system of the aircraft. So really the challenge is to probably work on different layers, keep the standards applicable to each device as reasonable as possible, and try to combine different features in a multi-layered approach that overall achieves an acceptable level of safety.
I see. Thank you very much for sharing with us on that, because Enzo, well, to be honest with you, I'm sure that many operators have been thinking about it. Why can't we have an industrial standards for the lithium battery fire? I mean, this would help the industry so much that they won't have to go around with different OEMs or even different materials of the product to do their own test, or even try to determine the standard of how they should test the product. And actually, talking about testing, and one of the things that people have been cautious about is the delay of fire detection or delay of triggering the fire suppression system. I'm sure this is being talked about by many of the pilots or captains in different operators. So, Torindo, did you ever get questions from operators asking you, okay, now I'm looking at your product from EASA report. How is it going to help me? Is it going to affect my fire suppression system or delay of detection of the fire in the cabin, in the cargo hold? Torindo?
Yeah, that's a common question that we get from the airlines plus the regulators as well. And I can safely say on our product, with every test that we have carried out, we have seen smoke emission within 3 to 5 minutes from the origination, fire originating. So it does not delay any of the smoke detection, because it's like, in my opinion, it's sometimes similar for you to wrap it up with this plastic wrapping that normally this cargo world uses in every container and every pallet. So, the answer is no, it won't hinder the smoke detection from these fire containment products.
Okay, and can I just switch to Enzo from the EASA perspective, because you also mentioned that in one of your future projects is to look at these possible delay of fire detection and fire suppression. Would that be the same kind of results that you observed so far in the test that you have done? And do you think you can reveal some of the elements that you are thinking of including into this future standard from this aspect?
The issue of smoke detection and fire suppression degradation of performance is basically linked to the capability that smoke has to come out, and the other way around, the agent has to come into the volume which is covered by the FCC or the FRC. The way we would like to address this issue is by having a requirement in the MPS. So it is true that today we have several tests performed on the currently available equipment that shows that there is a certain release of smoke outside the cover or container during the test, which would support relatively timely detection. So yes, it's not ideally an immediate detection as we are looking for with a smoldering fire in an open volume, but it's still compatible with possibly having an effective performance of the fire suppression system. The problem is without an MPS, the design may develop uncontrolled. So we would like to have a standard that is set so that we ensure that using FRCs or FCCs or bags would not compromise smoke detection. And I think the kind of performance that we have now is, let's say, what we are targeting as a reference for the future. But we don't want to have an evolution of the design that degrades performance. And when I say an evolution of the design, it doesn't mean that the design is simplified or it's worsening. If you think about the need to contain the product of thermal runaway within a confined volume, I think the combination of having an MPS for the cover and what is happening at other levels in the G27 and more in general at ICAO, in the ICAO panels, may contribute to drive the design towards a very effective way of handling certain fire scenarios. But the main problem we have for battery fires is, on the other end, that we cannot really identify a way to make a generic fire load definition that would not involve defining installation limitation. So you can use this FCC only with batteries and packaging that you have tested.
Thank you very much, Enzo. Then I guess that really helps clear some of the questions that we had in terms of, because, people always are struggling. We have got these fire containment equipment that can help maybe prolong what is happening inside or underneath the cover or inside the container for certain hours, so that the captains, they can find the closest airport to land. But at the same time, they are also struggling in the issue of, so when do I actually know there's a fire underneath, under the floor? So I guess what you just said is really assuring people to have a better understanding on the inference between these covers and containers and on the later time of the fire detection and the fire suppression. Well, I'm cautious on the time, but like I said in the very beginning of the webinar, we do take on questions from the floor. So we do have a question that I think is best to be answered by Trevor. So the floor is asking about, okay, so now that you have got these FCCs and FRCs, in terms of operation, what kind of challenges or operational constraints that you observed that you can share with us? Trevor?
Thank you, Candy, and it's a great question. I think it's one of those questions that's been in the industry for 15 years since Tarindu started making the fire containment covers. They're big, they're heavy, we have to move them around. It's going to take 20 guys to install them, and so on. I think that was maybe reality 15 years ago, but today I think at the end of the day, it is a myth now, and with proper procedures, proper training, and again, working with the teams that develop these, it's actually quite simple to install with 2 people in a matter of minutes, and same with the removal and folding and moving them around. So once you figure that part out, the logistics parts of positioning and repositioning actually work quite well. And you know, it was a concern we had, but not one we share today.
Thank you, Trevor. So it sounds like we are actually moving on. We are no longer at 10, 15 years ago. So thank you very much, Trevor. I almost thought that you were going to say that you need 2 candies to deploy the fire containment covers, but actually 1 Trevor to do it compared to 15 years ago. Thank you, Trevor. And this is more or less the end of our panel session on these fire containment equipment. Thank you very much, Tarindu, Enzo, Trevor. So we got some very good insights that actually many of the things that we talked about in the past, they are just myths, or we just moved on and we have got the new technology, lighter equipment, better equipment, or maybe in the future, very soon we will have a standard too. Looking forward to that. And with that, I'll end this panel session and pass over to Jeff for the next one.
Thank you, Candy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Candy.
Thank you very much, Candy. So the next session then we will be looking at is managing safety risk, the carriage of cargo and mail. Just before I introduce my my panelists this afternoon, in fact, and this is my, I have to admit that I should have told IATA that 2 of my slides were going to be coming in my introduction and not in this session. So the first 2 slides are actually related to my previous measures. You'll remember I talked about the hysteria, MH370. You may have remembered this headline that the role of batteries was being investigated when the airplane sadly disappeared. And there are some that would say that they played a role when there is very little evidence, but it didn't stop people. Didn't stop some people believing it. And then if we fast forward to this year, on the next slide, you'll see the Ethiopian Airlines 777 burning away at Shanghai. And as I say, the airplane was still burning when the headlines, which if we see up on screen now, appeared. Even though it is currently unknown how the fire began, it is raising renewed questions over the acceptability of lithium batteries. And then after that, it mentioned the called into question IATA support for allowing on passenger aircraft. So that's something which is, I think, very disappointing, and something which we're, as I said, we have to guard against and trying to redress that balance. So on to this next session then, and I'm going to talk a little bit first of all about something called Annex 6. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the various annexes to the Chicago Convention, the convention signed at the end of the Second World War to facilitate international air transport. There's 19 annexes, 18 is dangerous goods, but there's also Annex 6, which talks about the operation of aircraft, and effective from the 5th of November this year, so very soon, there are a number of things which the operator is going to have to do to consider. But first of all, it will say that the operator shall establish policies and procedures. We can click the next bullet if we could. We can click the bullet on the slide. Okay, so the operator shall, so it's a mandatory requirement, the operator shall establish policies and procedures that address items to be carried in the cargo compartment, and to ensure to a reasonable certainty a fire can be detected and suppressed until the aircraft makes a safe landing. And I think that's very timely. The excellent presentations we had previously with the work done on the fire containment covers not only looked at suppression, but also detecting the fire as well. So this is, the operator's got to establish these policies, and going on from there, that in terms of transport of items in the cargo compartment, the state of the operator, okay, shall ensure that the operator carries out a specific safety risk assessment related to the items that they may be carried in the cargo compartment. Now, if we click the next slide, Candy's already referred to this provision in the annex. She touched on the containment characteristics of ULDs, but you'll see a number of things there which the safety risk assessment must consider. So the hazards of the items being carried, what the operator is able to do, operational considerations. What does the airplane have? What does it have on board to be able to deal with or suppress a fire? What packing and packagings will be used? The quantity and distribution of dangerous goods. I'll come to that in a moment because that's, I see, as a particular tricky thing to deal with. And safety of the supply chain, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this last session. Just before we get on to the session, though, just one more slide I wanted to show you, because I pulled out two specific entries in some guidance material which is expected to be published, or has been published, sorry, this year. And there are two things here which I think the operators are going to be a little bit concerned about, shall I say. So first of all, it says that an operator should have procedures in place for monitoring the effectiveness of its interface management controls for ensuring nothing contained in cargo will endanger an aircraft. It's almost suggesting that if anything ever got on an aircraft, then clearly the operator's procedures would have failed. So there's a very high bar there. And then another one, which I really, I'd be interested to see the view of the operator, or the operator, I have one today, where it talks about, given the potential for significant fire, it says an operator may therefore wish to consider the quantity of individual cells to be transported on a single aircraft. Now, I have no idea how that would be done. We obviously don't know the number of cells in a package, much less on an aircraft. So again, these are things which I think which are going to have to be thrashed out with going into the future of working. We'll have to work on the experience. So I'm joined this afternoon then by, from British Airways, we have Nigel Patience, and from Kuehne Nagel, we have Kirsten Strauss, and from the Universal Postal Union, we have Dawn Wilkes, and we're going to talk a little bit about the safety of the supply chain. So first, if I may come to Nigel then, because this, as I say, is really aimed primarily at the operator, although as I'm sure as we have a chat this afternoon, it'll become clear that everybody plays a part. What are your thoughts then on what we've seen there, Nigel? So you've got to carry out this risk assessment. What are your thoughts on how you would actually go about doing this?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I think from an operator's perspective, or certainly from my perspective, first thing I say is I agree with the intent of the Chapter 15 changes. You know, if we start from a point where the aircraft manufacturers are saying that the fire suppression systems aren't going to adequately suppress a lithium battery fire, we've got to look at it. We've got to look at the risks. I think what gives us a challenge, and I think what you've just explained there, is some of the wording that's gone in there, and the high level of responsibility, the burden of proof that's placed on the operator. You know, ensure the safe transport of dangerous goods. That's going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. You know, we can manage the risks that are within our gift. So things like the capabilities of the operator, the training that we have, operational considerations, where we fly, the equipment we use on the aircraft. But the supply chain, managing the safety risk in the supply chain is you know, not just for British Airways, it's a major challenge for all operators. I think the short answer is we can't do it in isolation. As an operator, we cannot just do it in isolation. We need to work with all areas of the supply chain. It's impossible, it would be impossible to audit every potential customer looking to fly freight on British Airways aircraft, let alone every eBay seller, Amazon marketplace vendor, or every customer checking bags into the hold. And how far down the supply chain do you go? Do you go down to the individual components that go into batteries and equipment and so forth? I think for me, the starting point is that everything being presented to British Airways, you know, there's an element of trust in all of this, is prepared, packaged and presented in accordance with the IATA dangerous goods regulations. So in theory, everything should be acceptable for travel. So the obvious challenge there is with the sort of the undeclared and the misdeclared dangerous goods items. So basically for us, we're sort of taking a three-tiered approach to this. We're looking at experience, risk, and then intelligence. So what do I mean by experience? So some of the incidents we've had and sort of personal experience. So last year, in fact, it was almost exactly a year ago, we had a consignment that originated in southern China, in Shenzhen. It was sent by road and by sea to South Korea, and then was put on an aircraft from Incheon. The airway bill stated it was batteries contained in equipment, but it turned out it was spare batteries. You've got to start thinking, if people are going to all that time and effort to send things by road and by sea to another airport, they're potentially up to no good. So as a result of that in that particular station, we sent lots of reminders to our customers, to the shippers in Incheon, just reminding them 3480s are not acceptable on passenger aircraft. Now, anything that is presented that's come from sea to air is peace level screened, and there's random screening. So that's a particular response to areas of the supply chain in response to one incident. Then looking at risk, and British Airways generally, we're taking very much a risk-based approach to all of our auditing. So as I said before, you can't audit every supplier, every area. So we're taking a risk-based approach. And again, to use another example, so again, June last year, there was a 1200 watt-hour electric bike battery that caught fire in the mail sorting room in Los Angeles Airport. So that made us look at the risks of mail generally from the States. I think at the time we were uplifting mail from 6 different stations. So we worked very closely with USPS just to understand what they do at point of acceptance. So all of the post offices across the entire USPS network, and they actually use that incident in the LA fire room. They use that in training. They're looking at some very interesting algorithms to try and identify e-commerce vendors, shippers that might be regularly presenting stuff into the mail system. If based on risk, we think there's a potential issue, whether it's from a particular station or an area, we're actually conducting some arrivals screening as well. Now, that's sort of counterintuitive because the items have already flown. But what that gives us is a certain level of oversight and risk assurance that the controls that we have further up the supply chain are being effective. So again, that's sort of that risk-based approach. And I think the previous panel session, I thought the discussion on fireproof containers and fire containment covers was really interesting. When you think about the bow tie models, that's very much on the right hand side of the bow tie model. That's about reducing the impact once your top level event has happened. Really, all looking at the supply chain is looking on the left hand side, trying to stop the things getting on in the first place. And for us, we've got this overall sort of risk model and the control models. We're trying to get to a point where we've got really good insight into our control performance, and in theory, the theory goes that in the future we'd almost get to predictive control performance, where we might be able to identify where we think most likely a control is going to fall apart. The third bit then for us, for the approach we're taking to managing the supply chain, is the intelligence side. And I think we've signed up to the IATA Dangerous Goods Occurrence Reporting Scheme. I think you can't do it in isolation. You've got to share information with other operators. I think that's really important. I personally think the regulator has a role to play in this. Obviously, all attempted carriage or actual carriage events are reported in the UK to the CAA through the MOR scheme. I think there's a role that the regulator has to play in that. But also, we need to understand from the flight ops inspectors, I don't think there's any real clarity at the moment on what their expectations are from operators. So, from our side of things, actually documenting, doing a tabletop risk assessment, that's the easy bit. Actually getting effective controls that mitigate those risks that we can identify, that's really hard. And that level of responsibility, being told you've got to ensure that nothing gets into the cargo compartment, it's impossible to eliminate risks. We can manage risks to as low as reasonably practicable, but to eliminate risk, to ensure it, is really difficult. But yeah, we can't do it alone. We need to work with everybody in industry and across the supply chain.
Thanks, Nigel. Very interesting, and I think it goes to I think a perception of many people that operators have a connection with the people whose cargo they carry. But of course, as you say, you highlighted that the fact that okay, you might have a connection with a freight forwarder, but you certainly haven't got a connection with the original shipper, as you said, the eBay seller. So it's a very detached chain, if you like, from the operator that we're trying to manage. Certainly, speaking as someone who worked for a regulator for many years, it's a bit of a two-edged sword as well with the undeclared dangerous goods, because of course the better system you have for reporting undeclared, the more people you need to deal with the undeclared reports and take action. So it's again that definitely does pose a challenge for the regulators. So from a freight forwarder's point of view then, Kirsten, how do you see your responsibilities now in terms of ensuring or playing your part, if you like, in ensuring the safety in the supply chain? And do you see anything changing going forward? Any sort of other things that freight forwarders could be reasonably expected to do?
Yeah, I think from a freight forwarder perspective, as well as any part of the supply chain, really, the very principal statement would definitely be we're all in this together. We want to make sure we have a supply chain that's secure. We have family and ourselves on these planes, so there's everything that needs to be done or can be done realistically, we should consider and attempt to do. So today, obviously, the topic is already known, and my concern is more, and this has been already alluded to several times in this session and in previous sessions, the undeclared. I don't think we have a problem so much with the declared and those shippers that really are experienced international shippers that do global trade for years and decades. They know what they're doing. They have the best of intentions to do it correctly and properly. So dealing with dangerous goods on aircraft, I think we have a good track record, and we have very well established rules and regulations. We're all aware we have the right level of training. We have qualified staff to handle these shipments and to make sure they're properly handed over from the shipper, from our customers to the operators. So there I don't see too much of a concern. It's really the undeclared, and that really stems from, I think, mostly new entrants to the supply chain, these companies or suppliers that are now entering the markets in various areas and segments, and maybe not have as much experience with the international trade and the regulations and maybe the dangers associated with that. So that would be the area of focus. So for me, it should be an approach that really addresses educating those entities, and it's really very much an upstream approach. So starting with the operator to the forwarder to the customer, then we have suppliers, vendors, and so forth further upstream. So we really need to take steps to educate those people and make them aware what might not be considered a hazard or dangerous goods in your household or in your personal life might become a different story when you tender that for international trade. So for me, it's very much an upstream approach of educating, monitoring, and then but also sanctioning in the end. So there has to then be consequences for those people that do this deliberately. There should be blacklists, and this is we have speaking on behalf of Kühne Nagel here. We have these instances where we had experience with providers that or shippers that we've kind of noticed that they're not doing this properly, so they have been blacklisted. It's not many, but definitely these cases happen because usually we find people are willing to learn and from experience and be educated and then play by the rules. So there are certain steps we're already taking. We're educating staff with DG awareness type training to make sure not only those DG trained, because as I mentioned, that's the area of less concern to handle proper DG that's properly declared by properly trained and qualified staff. It's the other parts, things that might be undeclared, misdeclared, tendered as general cargo that then become a concern. So it's definitely our part to play to educate our staff to be aware of certain types of commodities, certain types of customers that tend to have maybe these lithium type batteries in their product, but also other types of dangerous goods, to then ask, double check, escalate, stop a shipment if necessary, to inquire. We also have in our documentation things where we really obtain statements from the people tendering cargo to us to declare that they are unclassified or non-DG, and to really make this a conscious statement, so they go think about it and maybe double check. So those are areas to look at. And also, I think some of the terminals in Asia, for example, are starting to take a closer eye on the possibly undeclared, misdeclared dangerous goods being introduced, and taking steps and asking us to really take measures, obtain certain declarations from our shippers, and then we have to give that as a back-to-back because we see ourselves as the intermediary. We don't look into these packages either. So we are very much an intermediary to make sure that what we are obliged to provide to operators or states, we then obtain from our customers. So my main message, I guess, would be very much that whatever the approach is, it's got to be a coordinated approach. It shouldn't be something, the horror scenario for me is that I will have a slew of different requirements, because now operators have to translate this into tangible procedures, into their risk assessments, that we get a slew of different requirements from different operators worldwide. So this would be the worst case scenario for me. So I think we should really make sure as an industry that we have a coordinated and aligned approach, and that we maybe look at and learn from other areas of the supply chain. So there are already very well established security type known shipper programs, as we know, that prevent the introduction of explosives into the supply chain. And there are very many countries that have introduced different measures to make sure this goes upstream and shippers become qualified and trusted. So really, I would hope that if we have to move forward here, which we do, that it is very much a joined up approach, and it's a common standard and not a slew of different requirements coming to the forwarding industry.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that again, people perhaps not so close to the industry as we are. I remember being told, well, why don't you go out to the shippers? Well, anyone who drops something off at a UPS or a FedEx drop box this afternoon can be a shipper. We just don't know where they are, do we? But it's interesting, isn't it, that so the operator may be dealing with, let's say, hundreds of freight forwarders. Kirsten, you may be dealing with thousands of shippers. Dawn, on the other hand, now we're talking about potentially millions of, I call them shippers, but senders. So in terms of UPU, the Universal Postal Union, again, how do you see the role you play in this challenge that Nigel has in, I'm not saying it's only his challenge, but the challenge in ensuring safety in the supply chain, when there are so many people? What are UPU and the various designated postal operators around the world doing?
Thanks, Jeff, for the question. And I think from what both Nigel and Kirsten have said, they've both hit on the fact that collaboration and cooperation across the board is absolute necessity. And that's where I see the UPU's role as being. That role of bringing together the stakeholders to create that cooperation and understanding. And that's where I see our role to continue to be, to play that important role in the safety and security of the supply chain. So for us, it's to attempt to bridge that gap and help everyone understand what DPOs are currently, the designated postal operators are currently allowed to do. What are the provisions that are set out in the UPU convention in our Article 19 that prohibits, them from carrying specific dangerous goods only on a very limited level? They're bound by the ICAO technical instructions. They're bound by their CAAs. The dangerous goods training that we have available for the DPOs is publicly available to them, and it follows the standardized training that's required. If a DPO wants to transport equipment containing lithium batteries, they have to have a specific certification. And those DPOs that have that certification are all publicly listed on the UPU public website. So that's available for everyone. We try to make as much information available as we possibly can on the website, and we try to work with all of our stakeholders to help create that understanding and help everyone realize how we can mitigate these issues, as Kirsten rightly said, of the undeclared, because that's really where we have the issue. And it is creating that education, not just for those who are accepting these items at the point of entry, but it's for the customer. It's for your mother and your grandmother and your uncle and your aunt that might not know that they can't ship something. So how do we contact everyone around the world and let them know? You know, and that's where we try to create these programs that each DPO can take and make their own, translate it into all the 5 languages, and we continue with that training and education through IATA. We have our IATA UPU contact committee, and we've been working most recently for a year, a little over a year, on creating some mail safety guidelines, which have been agreed upon by our expert team, and now they are going before our standing group to hopefully receive endorsement at the end of this month. So that's just an additional stopgap in providing some more information and some more training. So that those are some of the things that I see primary to the UPU, and something that we will continue to do and work together with all of our stakeholders on. And I think just one more point that Nigel said, the sharing of information. That is something that is absolutely integral. There has to be a centralized database to share the reporting of dangerous goods that are found in the mail stream. That has to be there, and that's something that we've been looking at for a while, and hopefully we can come up with something together that will be available to all, because one like you said, one country reports it and that country knows about it, but what about the other country or the DPO, or how are we tracking it back? So there has to be a closed loop scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Yes, and as touched on a couple of times, I think by Nigel, that we robust enforcement procedures as well, because nobody wants to prosecute people or enforce, but ultimately that has to be the deterrent. People must know that at the end of the day, if you do something so dangerous, then there are consequences, and of course that then sets the example for everybody else. So Nigel, just got to finish up now because we're just a little bit over time. Just a final word to you then. So as the annex is aimed at the operators, but hopefully from what you've seen, you're not in it alone. You'll see that the freight forwarders and the UPU are stepping up to the plate as well to play their part in this as well. So just a final word from you, Nigel.
Yeah, and thanks, Jeff. And I think that's it's really encouraging. For over the last couple of days, we've also had the Dangerous Goods Board with a number of other operators there as well, and it's clear from that as well that all of the operators are struggling with this element of Chapter 15, but we are all prepared to share information and work together to do it. So yeah, absolutely, working together is the way forward. So yeah, very encouraging.
Great, thank you very much, Nigel. So I'll pass back to Candy now. I hope I don't get into too much trouble because we're 4 minutes over time, but hopefully Candy will be understanding. So back to you, Candy.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And of course, yes, I understand. And you know what? We never just can finish our conversations when we talk about lithium batteries, dangerous goods, undeclared dangerous goods, and safety risk assessment, can we? So I'm really happy with the sessions that you just finished moderating. I think it really gives some very good insights for our operators and even the other parties in the supply chain, because everybody is struggling, but you are not alone. We are all together. So to wrap up, I hope you actually got some very good details, informations from all our experts in the past hour and a half. And there were just a quick recap on some of the key messages. So we will have the new regulatory updates for next year for lithium battery provisions. Don't forget to get your latest regulations, the manual, to prepare for your shipments. It's always a must. And on top of that, of course, then we had these different fire containment equipment that you can consider. Shippers can consider, freight forwarders, and so do the operators. But we have to watch out the new standard that EASA will be working on. And finally, safety risk assessment. This requirement is coming. And we have to, like Kerstin mentioned, we have to work all together, and we will try to develop some guidance to assist our industry to achieve that result. Thank you very much for joining us today, and in the past, to stay with us in the past an hour and a half. Our webinar is recorded, like I said in the very beginning, so you can still review it, or for some of your friends or other people in the industry that they missed this session, they can still go through the webinar again offline later on, and together with the PowerPoint slides. So remember to get your copy. Thank you very much. And today we received many questions during our webinar. We unfortunately did not have sufficient time to attend to all of them, but we have taken note on them, and we will be getting back to you all shortly. And other than that, if you still have any further inquiries, of course, anytime, just email us cargo@iata.org. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in person again next year. And for now, goodbye.